Hello everyone, bringing you a video today talking about the British 1944 pattern web equipment. This is going to be a fairly basic video, a part of the Reenacting Tips series. I've been doing a lot of them recently on the Second World War, British soldier, so I thought it'd be worth looking at some post-war kit because more and more people are getting interested in post-war or Cold War reenacting. And this may also be of interest to people who are just getting into collecting this stuff. We'll be doing more in-depth videos on this in the future, but I thought it would be worth doing a basic comparison of different components. So a little bit of history of the 1944 pattern web equipment. When most people think of the 1944 pattern web equipment, they think of the green equipment, which was used post-war as a theatre issue in the Far East. It's important to note, of course, that the equipment was never used in action during World War II. It was only used post-war. There was also a version made in khaki webbing with brass fittings. That never went into production in a big way, though there are trials items around that show up occasionally for sale. But this set went into full-scale production. The intention was for it to be used in the continuing war in the Far East. That never happened, of course, but it was used in the immediate post-war period and through right the way. Certain components certainly were seen right the way through to the end of the Cold War. We'll get into a little bit more of that during the video. So we have here on this mannequin here the first issue components, and this one here has some of the second issue components. Certain components didn't change throughout production, others did. We're going to have a look at these in more detail individually, but I thought it would be useful to have them on the mannequin set up to show you the way they're worn and a little bit easier to see some of the differences with them on the mannequin. We have here the two ammunition pouches, and they're different on this one here, as you can see. These are the initial issue. These are the first issue, which have to be worn high on the belt. They only have one set of C-hooks. And these here are the second issue, which have a second set of C-hooks and a belt loop as well, which allows them to be worn lower on the belt, which hopefully you can see comparing the two there. Another item that changed is the belt, and this is difficult to see from this, but when we show them close up, it should be a little bit easier to see the difference between the two. This is made of lightweight webbing, as the 1944 pattern was. It's quite a fine weave, and this one here is actually made of a heavier grade webbing and is more heavy duty. And that change was made because it was found, particularly as belts are often worn on their own, that belts were wearing out very rapidly, so a heavier duty belt was introduced. That's the differences we can see from the front. One point I did want to make here, and I thought this would be interesting from an illustrative point of view. This is being worn, this strap is actually part of the haversack. It comes round the lower part of the rib cage and loops through the back of the ammunition pouches. These, or basic pouches as they were known at the time, the nomenclature would change during 1944 pattern service life. These pouches are quite large. They're in fact larger than the 1937 pattern basic pouches, and when they sit high on the belt, they have a tendency to flop forwards. This strap here supports the top, and it's, as I say, it is part of the haversack. So when wearing the haversack on the back, you can loop this round through the ammunition pouches and buckle it round the front. Very, very rarely seen in the field, but this is an intentional part of the design. Wasn't used very much, as I say, but I thought it'd be interesting to show that on the mannequin here. As I say, a bit fiddly to do, so obviously not something that was done in the field very much, but it does solve that problem. So that's the differences we can see at the front here, and I will turn these round now and we can have a look at the back. Okay, so here we have a look at the back of the equipment, and you can see the two different versions of the haversack here. We've got the first issue haversack, which is roughly the same sort of proportions as the 1937 pattern haversack, though you do have the external pouches and a lot of things to carry things externally, obviously a lot of fittings to carry the lightweight shovel and pick that were associated with the set, and then also straps underneath which can be used to carry the poncho and sleeping gear and so forth. The later issue haversack is basically supposed to overcome the problem of this being rather small, but it becomes a very ungainly design at that point, and the straps and so forth aren't really in the right place for carrying it. That is the L straps. It's a bit tall for that, and it's not quite clear what was going through the designer's mind when they came up with this, because it's not an ideal solution. So that's the two different types of haversack. And one last detail difference to look at here, we have the metal cap water bottle here, and then this one here which has the black rubber cap, not plastic, black rubber, and we'll have a look at that in more detail in just a moment. So that's a look at the components on the mannequins. We'll have a look at these separately now in a bit more detail. So I thought it would be first useful to take a look at the web equipment setup as per the fitting instructions, and I have this skeleton set here set up as per the fitting instructions. We'll have a quick look at the details of this before we move on to looking at the various components and the changes between first and second issue. So
1944 pattern is quite interesting in that it deviates from previous British equipment in several ways. Starting with the belt, obviously it's a three-part belt, which is something that had been used in other equipment previously, the 1919 naval pattern, the 1925 RAF pattern, web equipment. So it's not an entirely new design, but the 6 points of support for the belt is new. So you have obviously the buckles on the pouches at the front to support the weight of the pouches, and indirectly the belt through the fact that you have the hooks on the back of the pouches. And then you have another set of support just behind the pouches with these little C hooks here, which these adjustable straps loop through. And then you have the standard 2 buckles at the back, which the other straps from the braces come down and attach to. So you actually have 6 points of support along the length of the belt, which gives a bit more stability. Another interesting design feature can be seen on the belt here with this little loop, which was designed to steady the stock of the rifle when carried on the sling, the sling over the shoulder. So this will loop round the stock of the rifle and steady it against the side of the body. Not seen many photographs of this in use, I'll be honest, but that was its designed purpose, that was its intended purpose. And then obviously you have the very wide flare at the top of the braces here to give a good load-bearing surface on the shoulders. So quite an intricate design in that regard, and obviously designed to give good support to the belt across there. So we have the 2 basic pouches to look at now, and these would later be renamed ammunition pouches to fit in better with the catalogue system. You have a right hand and a left hand pouch. The design is similar to the later 1937 pattern with the quick release and everything, the quick release tab, but the lids are modified, the flaps are modified, and the capacity is increased somewhat. So the right hand pouch is just that, a pouch. There's nothing special to talk about there. But the left hand pouch obviously has the loops on it for the bayonet, which would be carried across to the 1958 pattern equipment, of course, this design feature. But the set did also include a separate frog, which you can see here. This is basically made to late 1937 pattern form, but in lightweight green webbing, and you have the loop in the top there to take the number 4 spike bayonet, should you wish, and obviously the larger loops which will take the 1907 pattern sword bayonet. And this was a point, is not only can this be used if you wish to just wear the belt and the frog for drill order, but also it allows you to carry bayonets which are too long to be carried in the loops on the side of the pouch there. And at the end of the Second World War, of course, the rifle number 1 Mark III was still in service, and so some men may still be carrying the 1907 or the shortened Indian pattern bayonet, and they won't fit in the light loops on the side of the pouch, so you need a separate frog to be able to carry those. Here we have the inside face of the web equipment, that is the face worn against the body, and you can see the 3-part belt more clearly here, the 2 outer pieces and the back piece, and how it's adjusted by moving these up and down the back piece. That's how you adjust the size. You can also see the eyelets here very clearly for the M1910 style hanger hooks, which were part of the equipment. Obviously the water bottle carriers have those, and the machete sheath as another example. And these were also intended to allow American items to be carried on the belt. And you can see clearly here the 6 points of support for the belt, both through the ammunition pouches, through the basic pouches, through these 2 points here, which are basic little C hooks that the straps clip through, and the 2 buckles at the back of the belt there. Another feature you can see here is on the back of the basic pouches. We have these little loops at the top, and there are 2 per pouch, and they allow you to slot the strap from the haversack through, which I showed you earlier on the mannequin, which supports the top of the pouches and stops them sagging away from the body. As I say, not commonly used, but of design, part of the design intended to hold the pouches more securely against the body. And you can see how the braces here, you obviously neck down to a single 1-inch strap at the front here, and then the neck down to the 2 1-inch straps at the rear, which obviously provide these multiple points of support across the belt and give it a bit more stability. So we're going to have a look at the 2 different designs of water bottle here. Now, a lot of the web equipment we're going to be looking at, the second issue components for the web equipment, seem to have come in the mid-60s. There is a sealed pattern second issue haversack dated 1965, which lends some credence to the idea that the second issue pouches, the second issue belt, and the second issue haversack were all introduced around this sort of time. The bottle, by contrast, the second issue bottle, was actually introduced somewhat earlier, in the mid to late 50s. Around 1956 seems to be the first time it's mentioned, and certainly therefore a late 50s thing, really. So we have a first issue bottle on the side here. When first issued, the caps were secured with a chain, but the chains were, generally speaking, removed and replaced with paracord locally. Basically making unnecessary sound seems to be the reason for that. But there remained a problem. The body of the bottle and the cup is made of aluminium, the cap is made of stainless steel, and if we remove this, you can see a problem with it immediately is it's actually very noisy. And it's possible that this was one of the reasons for introducing the second issue bottle. The bottle design actually changes as well as the cap, and if we remove the cap here, you can hear it's much quieter, which is good. There's a bit of a longer neck as well, so there we go, the bottle design changes too. Now the cap is actually made of rubber, it's not plastic. If you see here, I can squeeze that and compress it. It is made of a fairly hard black rubber, and you can see the different design of the bottles here. There's a longer neck on the second issue, and it doesn't have this lip to take the rubber O-ring, the rubber washer there to provide a seal. Obviously it doesn't need it. If we just move these out of the way for a second, we'll have a quick look at the carriers. The carriers, as you can see here, the design basically didn't change a great deal throughout production. These two just have some manufacturing detail differences, and obviously the one I had with the second issue bottle on the right here has had the hanger hooks removed from it, but the design did not really change. And of course you have fittings in there, you have the pouch in there to take millbank bag and sterilising tablets and so forth, which we'll talk about in more detail when we go over the web equipment in more detail. As I say, this is just a beginner's guide to have a look at the external differences of things, so we'll have a longer talk about these in a future video probably. So here we can see two examples of the web belt. This is the first piece of web equipment we're going to have a look at in direct contrast. At the back here we have the first issue, and in the foreground here we have the second issue, and the design itself doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the fact that the later example is made of a coarser web material, and also it's heavier weight as well. I hope that shows up okay in the video. If not, you'll just have to take my word for it. Otherwise the design is identical. All the fittings are the same, and you can see here this is a size normal. The stampings on this are quite good. It's MWNS, I think it's 1968, the date on that one. Another detail just to look at in this, quite apart from the slight difference between the two in terms of the weight of the webbing they're made of, is a good way of storing the strap, or keeping the strap out of the way, that's designed to stabilise the stock of the rifle, is to loop it round the back. So bring it down, loop it round the back, and then clip it back on itself to the lift the dot fastener on the front there. Quite commonly done. I have that done to both these belts here. That's just a point of interest. It's a good thing to do to stop that catching on things and getting in the way. So that's a contrast between the two different designs of belt, or the two different versions of the belt. As I say, the design doesn't change, just the weight of material it's made from does. So we can now take a look at the difference between the first and the second issue ammunition pouches, and I have here a first issue right hand pouch and a second issue left hand pouch. Visually from the front they're both the same. Obviously the left hand pouch retains the bayonet loops on the side, as we can see, as we saw when we looked at the set assembled just before. So that part of the design didn't change, but if we turn these over we can see the difference between them both. And you can see here the right hand pouch obviously just has the lower set of hooks and no belt loops, and the second issue pouch has the belt loops fitted and the two sets of hooks. Now this one, as I said, when we looked at the full set, has the loops on it to take the strap from the haversack to support it around the body. This one just has the upper belt loop, and that serves the same purpose. You can slot that strap through the upper belt loop here, and as we'll see, the second issue haversack does retain that strap around the body to support the top of the pouch, as much as it was very rarely used. So we have the right and the left hand of the second issue, which just allows a direct comparison between the two. This right hand pouch has been slit at the back, which obviously would allow it to be worn low on the belt, which was an expedient method of doing this before the later design was introduced. So that's a comparison between the two. In terms of dates, it seems that the later ammunition pouches were introduced in the 60s, the mid 60s. So again, really you want, if you're looking at Borneo, Malaya and Korea, going back, you want obviously the early ammunition pouches. These can be worn obviously high on the belt in a way that makes them visually less distinct from the earlier type. The second issue can be worn in a way that makes them look more accurate for the earlier period, but it's still far preferable to try and pick up a pair of the earlier type with the one set of C hooks on the back. That would be my recommendation. So that's the two different types of ammunition pouch there, or the two different versions thereof. So here we have a direct comparison of the two haversacks, and they are very visually different, as you can see, the second issue being much larger than the first issue, which is on the left. From the point of view of reenacting or recreating the British soldier of the Cold War era, if you're looking at recreating the British soldier in Korea, Malaya or Borneo, you're going to want to look for the first issue. There is a sealed pattern example of the second issue haversack on khaki web, which is dated 1965, which really means it's introduced too late to really see service in Borneo, although of course 1944 pattern web equipment would be used for jungle warfare training long after this. So it was most likely these saw use during that time frame. Oddly enough, one of the few places I've seen photographs of them in use is with New Zealand infantry in Vietnam, which is strange, but there it is. Obviously 1944 pattern equipment was available to them at the time. So just looking a little bit at the features of these, just the external features we'll take a look at now. As I say, this is a fairly basic video, so we'll just have a look at the external features. Most of them are in fact replicated between the two, despite this being a much bigger design. So you have the fittings here, as I say, that's for the lightweight pick or shovel that was originally part of the equipment. Well, that's the initial intention of that. You still have, obviously, the straps and so forth have been removed, although this one still has the lower strap and buckle here, which is replicated between the two. The straps and everything holding the haversack down, the buckles and everything are the same design. Originally, there would have been two straps here leading down to these buckles on the base of the haversack here, which were basically to replicate the function of the supporting straps in the pack when used, the 1908 pack when used to carry the helmet and so forth. So those straps were added to allow that to be done. They will, when not being used, loop up through these loops on the front of the haversack flap here. The side pockets are somewhat different between the two. If we bring this up here, you can see this one has a twist lock, and the original design used the quick release tab there. You can see the difference between the two, although the pocket is roughly the same size. And you can see they both have a buckle here to allow them to be worn, carried rather down on the end of the braces, although trying to carry this on the end of the braces would be an interesting endeavour. Round the back, they're both carried on the back using the L straps, which are a development of the system introduced with, well, not introduced with 1937 pattern, but introduced into the British Army by 1937 pattern. So you've got the similar style of hooks and everything there, and the L straps don't change essentially. Obviously, you have the buckles on the back here. That feature of the design didn't really change. And originally, this would also have had, you can see here what I was describing earlier when we looked at the sets on the mannequins. Let's move this over slightly. The strap that goes around the lower part of the rib cage to support the ammunition pouches, this loops around the body to do that, and this one would originally have had it as well, but it's been removed. Which obviously we've already looked at the ammunition pouches. You can see how the method of doing that differed between the two, but this haversack would originally have had that as well, much as it was very rarely used. On the bottom we have the carrying straps for the poncho and sleeping gear and so forth, and this one would originally have had them as well, but they have been removed, as you can see. So as I say, just from illustrating the differences between the two, although this one's had a lot of the straps and things removed, it's nevertheless serves my purposes. When I do a more detailed look at 1944 pattern, when I do a more detailed comparison of these two, I'll either bother or hopefully I then have a nicer example with all the straps in place, so I can better illustrate that. But for the purpose of this video, it serves quite well.
So there we have a look at these two basic setups of 1944 pattern equipment. If you'd be interested to read more about the equipment and its history and so forth and development, highly recommend the website Khaki Web, which I've put a link to in the description. It runs over the history and the development of this equipment, and also there's lots of photographs of components, the stores codes and so forth. There's a lot more information on there, which I recommend looking at if you're interested in collecting this. But I thought it would be useful to have a look at the different components and how they changed over the equipment service life. So I hope you found that useful if you're looking into getting into this sort of period of British reenacting or collecting. If you like this sort of content and you'd like to see more, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. Obviously, there's also the notification button there, the little bell, which will notify you when I upload future videos. There's also a Facebook and an Instagram page, and the Facebook page is a very good place to get in touch with me if you want to ask questions and things. Links to both of those in the description as well. That's everything I wanted to cover in the video, I think. So until next time, bye for now.